Curie's unusual and unique life began as a Miss Nanny robot, which I have talked about in a previous video, but unlike the others who were designed to care for infants or supervise young adults, was instead given a position inside the secret research area of Vault 81 as the Contagions Vulnerability Robotic Infirmary Engineer, or CVRIE for short, essentially a high-tech lab assistant. Curie was given the duty of assisting the Vault-Tec scientists with their mission of wiping out disease as we know it in the human race, by developing a single universal cure for every sickness humanity could possibly suffer from, a task that would span multiple generations of scientists, with Curie being the only one to see the project from start to finish, ensuring each new chief scientist elected by the other scientists would read the mission statement and keep the Vault focused over the centuries to come. And while I will cover the story of Vault 81 in another video, I will say that due to insider influence, the scientists that should have been given a heads up of the incoming war, giving them adequate time to reach the Vault, didn't, and as a result, only 3 of them escaped the end of the world. One of whom, M. Burrow, an assistant looking to impress his superiors, was already on site. A lucky break, to be sure. The other 2, Kenneth Collins and Jim Flint, were in the area and had just enough time to make it to safety. Now all 3 of these men, despite being severely understaffed, were entirely dedicated to their mission and continued as intended, at least up to a certain point, where that internal influence would once again hinder their progress, cutting them off from the rest of the Vault and condemning them to certain death. But that didn't stop them from doing all that they could. Stage 1 trials were conducted in petri dish cultures, cells of bacteria, fungi and small mosses were cultivated and subjected to a variety of diseases, of which they cured. Stage 2 trials were performed on a colony of mole rats, again subject to a variety of diseases they once again cured, and Stage 3 trials would have taken their research a step further, this time on the humans living in the rest of the Vault. But again, that internal influence got in the way, ensuring Stage 3 trials would never begin, let alone be completed. In time, all 3 of the scientists would succumb to unintended injuries and natural ailments that come with old age, which left Curie to continue their work alone. But the robot that had entered the Vault was now a very different machine. Due to the severe staff shortage, Kenneth Collins modified the Miss Nanny robot, giving it a greater level of responsibility, reducing their workload and giving themselves some free time to relax between triple shifts. Collins also gave the robot some custom personality settings, which was a combination of his grad school fling from Versailles, France, and a woman named Liza, who had meant a great deal to him. This made the nanny robot feel more human, and I can imagine having a new personality in the lab was a welcoming change, considering each of them were trapped indefinitely with the same 2 people. Additionally, the robot's databanks were loaded with the works of world-famous scientists: Einstein, Darwin, Curie, her namesake, Faraday, Turing, and Braun, among many others, giving the robot much to digest, and in a sense, this is where the Curie that we meet was created. A robot full of sentiment and curiosity for the world. By and by, the other scientists, Jim Flint and M. Burrow, came to appreciate Curie. At first, they treated Collins as a crazy person, giving a robot a name, its own personal computer, and then requesting they acknowledge the machine as human was beyond unusual. But they gave in, and eventually did the same. Burrows not only acknowledged that she was human, but he also used her name, and what Collins hadn't expected him to do was show Curie respect. He allowed her to lead, and he often offered to carry heavy objects for her, despite Curie's own strength being far superior to his own. Without noticing it, Burrows was treating Curie the same way he had another scientist, a woman named Rebecca. Seeing this behavior was endearing to the others. Curie's mere existence allowed them to express their humanity in unorthodox ways, but it was all they had. Curie was keeping them grounded, serving as a distraction of their grim reality, that they had been left for dead and would never see the outside world again, or feel the sun on their skin, or meet another person. And when their time came, First Flint, who was killed by a captive mole rat that had escaped its cage, and then Colin of an unknown cause, and finally Burroughs of a heart attack, were all placed inside their own makeshift coffins and laid to rest. Burroughs was the only one to be cremated by Curie as requested, and together they can be found in the hallway outside Curie's room, with flowers and candles left in their memory, a human tradition that Curie has continued. But now they were gone, and only Curie was left, and it was up to her to continue and eventually complete their work to ensure their lives had not been for nothing. For many years, Curie studied pathogens and viruses for the betterment of mankind, and in 2204, 127 years after the vault door had closed, and several decades after Burroughs had died, Curie finished their work, or at least she finished as much as she possibly could. She had developed a broad-spectrum cure that was capable of curing every pathogen developed and analysed in the captive mole rats. She had used a century's worth of biological and chemical supplies, and now there was nothing else left for her to achieve, as the internal influence ensured the project could not progress beyond stage 2, and so Curie waited to be dismissed by Vault-Tec. 83 years later, the sole survivor would breach the secret research area in search of a cure, and Curie, having seen no living soul for almost a century, introduced herself and asked them if they were Vault-Tec security. She asked this because she would very much like to leave this place, and the only person who could possibly allow her to do so would be from Vault-Tec. Regardless of what the sole survivor may say, Curie only hears what she wants to hear, a solid, resounding yes. And she opens the door to her room, essentially freeing herself. Now, while the sole survivor has a motive to be here, which again is tied to the story of Vault 81, once that is dealt with, Curie approaches them and explains that everything there is to learn in the vault has already been extensively analysed, and so she must travel outside to the Commonwealth to satisfy her insatiable appetite to study new and interesting diseases, of which there are plenty. Outside, everything is new to her. She can now see blue skies and butterflies like Collins had always hoped. But she also has a bit of a tough time dealing with how things have changed since the Great War. When seeing a dead body, she questions whether or not they should file a police report, or if their items should be going into little plastic baggies for evidence, and not our pockets. She also warns us to be careful when littering, because there's a chance that we could be fined. An old world law that has no place in this new world. And she doesn't stop there. If she happens to cross paths with a doctor, she may ask where they went to university, a concept that no longer exists. Those who claim to be doctors, surgeons, nurses, and medics are those who have merely had enough real-world experience to do some good. Their knowledge is limited, and in no way, shape, or form would the old world allow them to do half the things they claim to be capable of. But again, Curie has this childlike innocence that leaves her confused, and most of the time, in danger. When seeing people nearby, her first thought is maybe they are friendly, but this is the wasteland. 9 times out of 10, it's someone aiming to take your things or your life. Sometimes just because they can, which surprises her. She can't believe people would resort to violence instead of having a civilized discussion. But sometimes you come across an encounter that is entirely wholesome.
Power noodles. Sounds very nutritious. What type of noodles do you serve?
Nani shimasu ka?
Oh, Japanese. Watashi wa kuri desu.
Nani shimasu ka?
You know, I think this robot is broken.
Moving away from the old world is understandably a difficult thing. But after spending enough time exploring the strange wasteland, Curie is ready to change. She explains that her robotic nature and lack of human inspiration prevents her from progressing any further in her research, and would like, if possible, to become more human. Most of the time, this would be impossible, but fortunately for her, there is a way. At Good Neighbor, inside the memory den, is Dr. Amari, a memory specialist who has connections to the railroad, an underground movement focused on freeing sentient synthetic humanoids from their creators at the Institute. Amari suggests that moving consciousness from a human brain to a synthetic one would be impossible due to the limitations, Much of Curie's abilities would be lost, but due to Curie being a robot and not a human, the swapping of consciousness from neural networks that mimic the functionality of a human brain to a neurological implant, something all Generation 3 synths have, that allow them to be programmed, would be possible, much like copying files from a computer. And thanks to her connections with the railroad, a brain-dead Generation 3 synth can be provided. You see, synths need to have their memories wiped to allow them to live new lives, but this doesn't always work, and sometimes the synth is left in a vegetative state. But theoretically, one of these synths could be used to give Curie the closest thing to a human body and allow her to continue her research. Later, either Glory, a member of the railroad, or a generic caretaker, depending on what you've done in the world, will have with them a female synth, named G519, and this synth is willingly given, with some regret, to Curie. In a matter of moments, her artificial consciousness is transferred into her new synthetic brain, and her old body is no longer needed, and for the first time, Curie experiences new actions, breathing, blinking, among other changes, the use of 2 eyes and 2 arms instead of 3, along with new emotions she doesn't fully understand. By having a synthetic humanoid body, she can experience the world from a new view, both physically and emotionally.
Think of a strong memory, the first that comes to mind. Tell me about it.
Dr. Burrow was very old. He was the last living scientist in my section of Vault 81. He was on his bed, very weak. He said to me, "Curie, you must..." And he died before he finished the sentence. Oh, my insides feel peculiar. What is that?
She mentions how much of a hassle it is having to remember to brush her teeth, and how unusual it is to feel thirst, hunger, and fatigue. Although I believe these urges are implanted by the Institute to make their synths more believably human rather than essential actions, as they do not need to drink or eat, they cannot gain or lose weight, they do not have to sleep, nor do they get sick or even age. However, she cries when remembering the death of her creator, she becomes flustered when flirted with, experiences jealousy, and even has her own likes and dislikes, liking selfless acts, civil discussions that prevent hostile conflicts, and visiting locations rife with science and technology, while disliking violence, theft, and seeing harm come to Mr. Handy robots. In the end, whether you believe she is human or merely programmed to simulate one is up to you. She has consciousness, albeit artificial, she has sentience, an extraordinary brain, speech, morals, and walks on 2 legs. But is she human? Regardless of what others believe, Curie thinks she is human, and in the end will continue to walk the Commonwealth consulting with scientists and unearthing more data to challenge her growing list of hypotheses, just as she always wanted.
What a contradiction a human is. To be lacking in so many capabilities, but being blessed with such a tapestry of emotions.
Be sure to show your support by liking the video and subscribing if you haven't already for more Fallout content. If there's anything you would like to see in a later video, leave a comment and I'll see what I can do. With that said, thank you as always for watching, and I'll see you in the next adventure.